The wind moved like a living thing across the valley, a low, mournful breath that carried the bite of ice and the silence of a world locked in winter. Lyra pulled her fur cloak tighter as she walked along the ridge above her clan's camp. Below her, a thin line of smoke curled into the pale sky, rising from the fires they fed with brittle branches scavenged from a forest that seemed to shrink more every day. The season was colder than any she remembered. Even the elders whispered that the spirits of winter had grown angry. Snow stretched in every direction, smooth and untouched, except for the deep footprints of the mammoths that had passed through at dawn. Lyra watched their distant shapes move slowly across the valley floor, great hulking beasts disappearing into the white horizon. They were heading toward warmer lands, she guessed. Even the giants were running from the cold. Her clan did not have the same luxury. She descended the ridge and stepped into camp. Children sat huddled beside the fire pits, their cheeks raw from windburn. Hunters sharpened stone blades with grim faces, as if preparing for a battle they already knew they might lose. The food stores had grown thin, the animals had grown scarce, and they all knew they had wandered dangerously close to the territory of the beings the clan called the Other Folk. Lyra had heard the stories since childhood. The Other Folk were larger, stronger, with strange heavy brows and voices like gravel. They lived in the deep forests and caves, crafting tools almost as skillful as human hands. Some elders spoke of them with fear, others with caution, but Lyra had always felt something else when she heard their name: curiosity, wonder, a sense that the world held more stories than her clan dared to believe. She walked toward her father, who stood along the edge of camp with the other hunters. They were speaking in low tones, glancing toward the northern forest where shadows seemed to move between the trees. Her father's brow tightened the moment he saw her. "You shouldn't wander alone," he said, "especially now." "I wasn't far," she replied. "The valley is quiet." "Quiet means something is watching," one of the hunters muttered. Lyra swallowed the reply she wanted to make. Instead, she looked beyond them, into the trees. She thought she saw movement, there a flicker, just a twitch in the shadows. But when she blinked, there was nothing. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay close today, we hunt soon. If we don't bring back meat, the children will suffer." "When do we leave?" "When the storm clouds clear, but we'll need to travel deeper into the forest this time." Lyra paused. "That is where the Other Folk live." A long silence followed. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances. Her father nodded grimly. "We have no choice. The forest belongs to anyone strong enough to survive it." Lyra turned away, troubled. The thought of facing the Other Folk stirred a strange flutter in her chest. Not quite fear, not quite excitement, something in between. When the storm finally eased, hours later, she joined the hunting group. Snow crunched under their feet as they pushed into the dense wood. Wind hissed through the tall pines, shaking loose flurries that drifted like white ash. Lyra walked near the rear, bow in hand, eyes wandering. She watched the trees, the tracks, the patterns of broken branches. Every detail felt important in a forest that held more secrets than she could count. The hunters moved quietly for a long time, leaving only faint trails behind them. They found nothing. Nor the ear, no boy, not even the faintest print of a hair. The valley felt emptied, as if life itself had fled. Then the wind shifted. Lyra stopped, raising a hand. The others turned to her, tense. She crouched low, touching the surface of the snow. A set of footprints larger than human, deeper, spaced wide apart, crossed their path. The edges were sharp, fresh. Her father knelt beside her, his voice dropped to a whisper. "The Other Folk." The hunters exchanged fearful looks. Lyra breathed in the cold air, her thoughts racing. The footprints led north toward the heart of the forest. "We should turn back," one hunter urged. "We can't," another argued. "Our people starve." A storm cloud of panic began to form between them, and Lyra felt it like a stone in her stomach. The clan was already scared. This discovery would push them closer to desperation. Before the argument could settle, a gust of wind swept through the trees, and a crack echoed somewhere ahead, a broken branch under heavy weight. Every hunter froze. "Something is close," her father murmured. The group raised their weapons. Lyra held her breath. She felt watched, not by an animal, not by something mindless, but by something aware. The forest suddenly erupted in a swirl of white as the wind kicked up a curtain of snow. In the chaos, Lyra lost sight of the others. She stumbled forward, blinded, reaching out. The storm lasted only moments, but when it passed, she found herself alone in a narrow clearing. And she was not alone. Across the clearing, half hidden behind tall spruce branches, stood a figure, broad-shouldered, thick-limbed, covered in furs. His breath steamed in the icy air. His brow was heavy, his eyes deep and dark, curious, wary, alive. A Neanderthal, Korvac. He stepped forward slowly, gripping a stone-tipped spear. Lyra's heart hammered, yet something held her still, something unspoken in his gaze. Not anger, not bloodlust, something closer to recognition, as if he too had heard stories of her people. The forest was so silent she could hear her own breath. Snowflakes drifted between them like suspended ash. Korvac lifted his spear, testing her reaction. Lyra did not run, and for a long trembling moment, neither did he. The world seemed to hold its breath. Lyra stood frozen in the clearing, snow settling on her eyelashes, as Korvac studied her with the sharp, assessing stare of a creature who has lived too close to danger his entire life. His heavy brow shadowed dark eyes that flicked across her face. Her hands, the bow at her side. He shifted his weight, ready to strike if she moved too suddenly. Lyra raised her palms slowly, showing she held no arrow. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the sound might crack the stillness between them. She wondered if he heard it, to her fear, her confusion, her strange, inexplicable curiosity. Korvac lowered his spear a fraction, just enough to show that he wouldn't attack first. The wind broke the stalemate. It rushed through the clearing, scattering a fresh veil of snow between them. Lyra blinked, and for a moment the Neanderthal seemed to fade into the blur of white. Then he stepped back, disappearing into the dense trees with surprising speed and grace for someone his size. By the time Lyra dared to breathe again, he was gone. She stood there trembling, unsure whether she had imagined the entire encounter, but the footprints in the snow deep, distinct, unmistakably real, told her she hadn't. By the time she found her way back to the hunters, her father's voice thundered across the forest. "Lyra, where were you?" His face was pale with worry, but relief softened his anger when she stepped into view. "We thought you were lost. The snowstorm separated me," she said. She hesitated, then added softly, "I saw one." The hunters tensed instantly. "Saw one what?" her father asked, though he already knew. One of the other folk. A heavy silence fell. The hunters crowded around her, demanding answers. Lyra described the figure, the spear, the way he had watched her. She left out in some instinctive act of protection, the part where he had hesitated instead of killing her. The clan took her words as a warning. Her father's jaw tightened, and the decision was made without further discussion. "We leave the forest now," he said. "We tell the others to prepare. The other folk are too close." Fear rippled through the group as they turned back toward camp. Lyra followed, her thoughts spinning. The memory of Korvac's eyes stayed with her, alert but not vicious, guarded but not cruel. Something inside her whispered that the stories her clan carried were only half-truths shaped by fear. By the time they reached camp, the light was fading. The hunters announced the sighting, and whispers spread like fire. Lyra watched her people react the way cornered animals might, with suspicion, blame, tightening fists around weapons. That night, she lay awake by the dying fire. A cold crept in through every seam of her furs. But it wasn't the chill that kept her awake. It was the sound of the Neanderthal's careful breath in her memory. She couldn't explain why she felt compelled to understand him, or why she sensed he hadn't wanted to hurt her. The world was bigger than her clan believed, fuller of life and meaning than the stories they used to draw boundaries around their fears. The next morning brought no peace. The elders argued around the fire pit. Some insisted they move south, others demanded they prepare to fight before the other folk pushed them out. Her father said little, but she could see in his eyes that he had already chosen caution over curiosity. That choice would lead to bloodshed. Lyra felt it in her bones. Unable to stay silent, she stepped forward. "They didn't attack me," she said. "They're struggling too. We saw their tracks, no food, no game. They're just trying to survive like we are." One elder gave her a pitying look. "Child, they have strength enough to crush us. You saw what they are." "I saw someone thinking," she replied quietly. "Not a monster." Her father's expression hardened. "Enough, we cannot risk believing they are like us." But Lyra already knew differently, and the truth weighed on her more heavily than her father's disapproval. Later, as dusk draped the valley in blue shadows, she slipped away from camp. She moved quietly, careful not to leave obvious tracks, and headed toward the forest where she had seen Korvac. She didn't know what she expected to find, only that the tension in her clan was building to something dangerous. She had only one chance to prevent a war that didn't need to happen. The forest welcomed her with its familiar hush. Snow muffled her footsteps, and the cold stung her cheeks. She followed the trail of footprints she remembered, deep imprints leading toward the rocky ridges north of the clearing. When she found him, the sun was sinking behind the trees. Korvac stood beside a fallen tree, kneeling over the body of a young Neanderthal boy. The child's skin was grey with cold, his limbs thin. Korvac's shoulders shook as he covered the small body with furs. His grief was raw, exposed, heavy. Lyra froze at the sight, struck by a pain that didn't belong to her yet somehow reached straight into her chest. She had never imagined the other folk could mourn like this, could love like this. And now she understood. They were not giants of myth, they were families fighting the same brutal winter. Korvac turned suddenly, sensing her presence. His eyes widened, not with anger but exhaustion. His spear lay on the ground beside him. He didn't reach for it. Lyra stepped forward slowly, heart aching in her throat. Without words, she knelt in the snow a safe distance away, bowing her head in shared sorrow. The gesture seemed to reach him. For the first time, his expression softened, not enough to trust her, but enough to see her. In that quiet snowfall, between two grieving worlds, a fragile thread of understanding formed. A bridge, delicate and dangerous, across the ice. The following days passed in a slow, suffocating tension that seemed to freeze the very air. Lyra moved through camp like someone carrying a flame no one else could see, fragile, flickering, and dangerous to touch. She said nothing of Korvac's grief, or the small body she had seen in the snow. Her father already watched her too closely, sensing the change in her, even if he didn't understand it. The hunters trained harder. The elders whispered about raids and stolen land. Every mention of the other folk felt like a stone thrown into Lyra's chest. She tried to speak reason once, but fear had rooted itself too deeply in her clan. The other folk are desperate, she said to her father after another argument swelled around the fire. Their children are dying. If we strike, we'll only push them further into violence. He stared at her as though she had transformed into a stranger. You speak as if their lives matter more than ours. I speak as if their lives matter exactly the same. Her father's face tightened. Enough. You weren't harmed the first time, but you might not be so lucky again. We move at moonrise. Move, or attack. He didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. As the clan prepared, Lyra's heart pounded with a rising sense of dread. She saw the way the hunters sharpened their blades, as if preparing not for survival but for vengeance. She saw fear turn into anger, and anger twist into hatred. And in the midst of it, she saw children thin, shivering, hungry, who would bear the cost of every decision made by frightened adults. When darkness fell, the clan gathered at the edge of the forest. Torches burned in their hands, small, trembling lights against the vast sweep of night. Snow began to fall in soft flakes that glowed orange in the firelight. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like the world was holding its breath before a scream. Lyra slipped to the back of the group. Her hands were shaking. The moment the hunters faced forward, she stepped away and vanished into the trees, heart racing. She knew the forest paths better than her father realized. She knew how to hide her tracks. And more than anything, she knew she had little time. The forest swallowed her completely. The torches behind her faded to faint glimmers, then disappeared. She moved quickly, weaving around ancient pines, breath puffing in pale clouds that trailed her like memories. Her mind replayed the image of Korvac kneeling in the snow beside the dead child. The grief in his eyes had changed her. It had opened something in her she couldn't close again. Tonight, that grief would turn to rage if her clan attacked without warning. She reached the Neanderthal settlement just as the snowstorm thickened. Their camp was built in a rocky hollow, protected from wind. Fires burned low beside shelters made of branches and hides. She saw their faces tired, thin, hardened by winter. She saw their weapons ready but their movements slow, hesitant. She saw that they, too, expected violence. Korvac appeared from the shadows the moment she stepped into the clearing. His expression darkened in recognition. For an instant, she thought he might turn her away or worse, but he didn't raise his spear. He approached cautiously, eyes trying to read her trembling stance. You must leave, she whispered, breathless. My people, they're coming. Tonight he didn't understand her words, but he understood her fear. He followed her pointed gestures, her desperate motions toward the forest. His gaze flicked to the others in his group, elders, mothers, children huddled near the fire, and his jaw tightened with the weight of leadership he hadn't asked for. He growled a low warning, gathering his people. Lyra didn't know if they meant to flee or fight. Before either choice could be made, a sharp cry rang from the forest edge. A torch arced through the air like a falling star. It struck the ground near a shelter and exploded into flame. The night erupted. Humans poured into the clearing, shouting. Weapons raised. Neanderthals roared back, grabbing spears. Flames licked over the snow, hissing and spitting as they spread. The storm threw wind across the scene, scattering embers that glowed like angry fireflies. Lyra screamed for them to stop, but her voice drowned beneath the chaos. A human hunter lunged toward a Neanderthal woman shielding a small child. Lyra moved without thinking. She shoved herself between them, raising her arms. The hunter skidded to a halt, shocked. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "They're not our enemy." A snarling cry tore through the clearing. Korvat slammed into the hunter, knocking him away from Lyra. Snow exploded beneath them as they rolled. Lyra stumbled back, caught between sides that no longer cared to distinguish her from the threat. The battle spiraled into madness. Fire lit the storm in violent flashes. Lyra saw faces contorted in fear, not hatred, humans and Neanderthals alike, all fighting to protect someone, not destroy for pleasure. She realized then that this wasn't a war. It was a collision of starving, frightened families. A child's cry pierced the storm. Lyra turned and saw a Neanderthal boy slipping on the ice, about to fall into the path of a hunter's spear. Without thinking, she dove forward, grabbing the boy and pulling him aside just as the spear struck the ground inches from them. The hunter froze, eyes widening in shock. Korvat saw her. In that instant, through fire, snow, and violence, his expression changed. Something in him recognized what she had given up to protect one of his own. A hunter behind Lyra raised his weapon, aiming for her back. Korvat roared and swung his spear, knocking the man aside. Lyra felt the rush of air as the blade passed where she had been standing seconds before. They had saved each other, but the battle had taken its toll. When dawn finally crept through the smoke, both clans pulled away, wounded and exhausted. The fires smoldered, leaving black scars in the snow. Lyra stood trembling, her breath ragged, her clothes singed. Korvat stood opposite her, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Snow drifted between them like the beginning of a new, fragile peace. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They both understood that something had changed forever. The winds shifted when spring finally returned, carrying warmth over the valley where the two peoples, Neanderthal and human, had once stared at each other across the frozen river. But the land was not as it had been. Charred trees marked the spots where firelight had cut the darkness months before, and the ground still held the scars of a night no one wished to relive. Asha walked slowly along the ridge, the newborn strapped against her chest in a sling of softened hide. The infant slept soundly, unaware of the weight of history carried in its tiny, fused fists. Her steps were careful, not from fear now, but from the fragile awe of what she had brought into the world, a child that belonged to two bloodlines, once convinced they could never share the same earth. Oren walked beside her, quieter than usual, his heavy brow casting a shadow not of threat anymore, but of thought. He kept glancing at the child, as if the very sight of it contradicted centuries of inherited certainty. His people had always believed humans were fragile and unpredictable. Now his son had the shape of both species, his strength, Asha's fire, and something new neither could yet name. Behind them followed a small procession, clan members from both sides. They traveled together now, cautiously, like deer who had learned to graze in the same field but still listened for the first snap of a twig. Peace had not come instantly after the night of fire and snow, but survival had a way of bending the rules of pride. The elders insisted this gathering must happen. Both peoples needed to see the child. They needed proof that the world hadn't ended when the river melted, when the mountains rumbled, when one brave moment Oren shielding Asha from his own kind, Asha dragging him from the collapsing shelter, had rewritten everything. Asha stopped by the clearing where the old Neanderthal hearthstone still sat. Once it had been a symbol of territory. Today, it was only stone. She sank to her knees, loosening the sling and lifting the baby. The infant squinted at the sunlight, then blinked with soft confusion, two brown eyes shaped like hers, but wide-set like Oren's. "It's time," she whispered. The elders approached. From the human side came Ebo, his hair silvered, his face marked with a mapwork of countless winters. From the Neanderthal side, Gara, broad-shouldered, scarred, slow-moving now but still radiating the old power that had once kept Asha trembling from afar. Both stopped before her, studying the child as if afraid the slightest wrong breath might change the future. Gara spoke first. Her voice was deep, but not harsh. "He is stronger than yours," she said, nodding at Asha, "and quieter than ours." A long pause, something in between. Asha felt Oren tense. Old insults lingered like ghosts, old habits too. But before he could respond, Gara continued. "That is good." Ebo stepped forward. "This child carries two worlds in his blood." His voice shook, but not from age, rather from the impossible enormity of what they stood before. "Hunt well, think well, live long. This has always been our blessing, but today," he exhaled slowly, "today we bless something we do not yet understand." Asha held the child closer. The wind brushed over the clearing, carrying birdsong and the distant rumble of thawing ice. Life. Waking again. Oren lowered himself onto the grass beside her. He took the baby not roughly, but with reverence, as if holding a secret carved from bone. He will walk between two paths, Oren murmured, mostly to himself. What will he become? A beginning, Asher answered. If we let him. Behind them, the others murmured, some with wonder, some with fear, some with the strange trembling hope that comes only when the world changes too quickly for the heart to keep up. For weeks after that gathering, survival drew the two groups together. The storms of the previous winter had driven game from their usual trails, and hunting alone was no longer possible. So the two peoples learned, awkwardly, to share. Oren taught Asher's kin how to track wounded animals for miles, following the faintest clues through rock and brush. Asher's people taught his how to set clever traps and preserve meat through sudden heat spells. Sometimes they laughed together. More often they simply learned to stand without flinching. But the greatest change unfolded quietly. It grew in the way Oren looked at the humans when they solved problems with strategies foreign to his people. It showed in how Asher noticed the Neanderthal's strength was not brutishness, but precision honed from a different kind of life. It drifted through every shared fire, every past tool, every hesitation replaced by trust, and it settled deepest in their son. He grew faster than Asher expected, babbling in sounds that echoed both languages. He gripped objects with startling strength, but examined them with the careful curiosity of her people. When he looked at them, really looked it, felt as if his gaze stretched beyond the valley, as if he sensed some future waiting just out of sight. Asher often wondered if thousands of years from now, others would carry traces of this moment in their bones, if the world would remember what began here, not with a battle, not with conquest, but with two frightened beings who refused to run. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Oren wrapped an arm around her shoulders and watched their son toddle toward a cluster of young from both groups. The children paused, fascinated, but then easily accepted him into their game. Look, Oren said softly. Asher smiled. They don't see difference. They will, he replied, but maybe they won't fear it. She leaned her head against him. Maybe what remains in the blood is not the old hatred. Maybe it's the courage to try again. Oren nodded slowly. Then let this place remember us kindly. And as their son's laughter rose into the twilight air, a sound neither species had ever heard before, Asher felt deep in her bones that the story of the world had changed, quietly and forever.